is a possibility of, member countries influencing the governance within this particular institution.
They can't go to hospitals, so now the poor people have to leave their jobs and come take care of the people. So yes, they negatively affect the quality of life.
Over time, the mandate of the international financial institutions has been growing bigger.
Taxes are increased and expenditures on public goods are reduced. So they tell you, okay, so for you to be credit worthy, what you have to do, number one, you have to cut expenditure. Where do you cut expenditure? You cut expenditure on health and on education.
The most essential.
And it is possible for the Global South to actually overcome the reliance on international financial institutions.
Welcome, viewers, to Regional Advocacy on Regressive Policies Fostering Inequality, a podcast series that explores how decisions at international financial level affect communities, economies, and daily lives across Africa. This is a podcast series that is powered by Tax Justice Network Africa. On the podcast series today, I am joined by my friend and colleague, Job Kihima, who works for Tax Justice Network Africa. Welcome, Job, and please do introduce yourself.
Thank you, Francis. It's a pleasure being here. My name is Job Kihima, as you had placed it. I work for Tax Justice Network Africa, and I serve as the Knowledge Management Assistant. Thank you.
Thank you. Job, today we are talking about the hand behind the policy, and we are looking at the history of the formation of what we would call Bretton Woods institutions. Yes. And to just kick us off, there are certain global economic conditions that existed and led to the creation of the international financial institutions, especially in the post-World War II period. Can you please speak a little bit about that?
Yes. So after the Second World War, as you had rightfully stated, 1930, coupled with other economic factors, such as the Great Depression, there was a need for countries or sovereigns to come together and try and find a better solution to some of the financial distress they had already experienced. Recently, we've seen in our generation what war could be able to do and how that brings about different economic implications to some of the different macro and microeconomic components to different countries. We've seen the Russian-Ukraine war and what that one does. Currently, there is the different one being experienced, Israel and Palestine, what that one does. So in the 1930s, the Great World War had bigger ramifications because of the number and the magnitude of countries that did participate in that war. That necessitated countries to come together because there was a decline in terms of the economic output of the countries. Much of the resources was being spent towards the military side of the sovereign. And thereafter it sort of now coming to a stall, they needed to rebuild. So close to 44 nations joined hands to try and see what they could be able to do for themselves. In this case, you're talking about the likes of US, the likes of Britain, and to an extent, some of the countries that did have massive impact to the world, countries such as Japan. And it led now for them, those states coming together to try and see how best to go to solve some of the things they were experiencing. To it now, not explicitly, and we'll come to maybe talk about this, in terms of the rebuild, it wasn't technically focused into components to maybe elements of tax. However, to it was more about giving out loans to be able to do infrastructure bits of the work that was going on. To it also, with trade being sort of like affected, the balance of trade wasn't quite adding up, and they needed things to be able to maybe reduce the fiscal deficit in that essence. And to it, then these countries now came together in one big table, round table. By that time, there was scramble and partition for Africa, so we weren't there. And then the 44 countries were able now to come up with two key institutions that were able to maybe now help them and sort of like bring them together, align their policies, and be able now to forge now a new font in terms of the new dawn that we're seeing now post 1944 onwards. Yes.
Yeah, thank you for highlighting that countries were looking at collapsed infrastructure. They were looking at depleted accounts. They were looking at huge fiscal deficits. They were looking at reduction in the ability to produce, even simple things like food.
For sure.
And countries were looking towards an opportunity to rebuild and come back to a position of having better economic prosperity. But is it all countries, or is it only some countries? Is it the global north, or is it the global south that really participated in this?
Okay. So as earliest on stated, the list is 44.
Yes.
So we're sticking to 44. At that time, independence wasn't something that Africa would have sort of maybe think about. At that time, there were some of battles that we were trying to fight, coming up with independence. And in this sense, those ones who had realized economic independence, for lack of a better word, they had realized what infrastructure means. They had realized what sort of like a good, robust economy, export, import would mean, were those who came together after the ramification of the war. And they created two important institutions. At the moment, they might seem as one tied together in terms of some of the roles and the capacities they're handling. But in that time, one was now meant to look into elements such as foreign exchange and in between those elements. By that time, when things were happening that way, and when the 44 countries in the global north were meeting, the only thing that made sense to them was something called gold. And they agreed on one denomination that was the US dollar being used as a medium of exchange, but then for purposes of being able to trade forex and be able to do the cross-border trade, then they anchored it on the gold bit. And to it, at that time, I don't think Kenya, we did have our own currency. We couldn't be able to get that seat at the table. We were using the pound. So in this sense, everything pointed onwards to the global north. At the same time, also, we didn't have sort of like a sovereign to an extent, where we could maybe to an extent borrow loans in between that capacity. And to them, having loans to be able to maybe mend some of the damaged hospitals, being able to access loans to be able to do some of the broken roads or some of the facilities that were in distress, it made sense for them. And then to it now, bore the fruition to having the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. So one for looking into elements of the fiscal deficits and tracking elements in between those lenses, and one now focusing on elements such as grants and loans to now make them develop and get to now a state they were before the war. Yes.
Yeah. So along those same lines.
Yes.
They came together at the Bretton Woods conference.
Yes.
And the Bretton Woods conference had a lot of impact on the mandate and structure of what we now call the IFIs.
Yes.
Yeah. Please unpack that further. How did that conference, what kind of impact did it have on the mandate and the structure of the IFIs?
After the 44 nations sitting, agreeing, they had to allocate each other's sort of weights and powers to whatever they're able to do at the table. Then sort of like a quota system was drawn where to its structured elements such as special drawing rights, which basically gives weight towards those countries being able to give a say and to give a direction to how the two institutions will work. Over time, we've realized they have been able to morph in the work and the mandate that they do. given that element, other countries were then drawn to them. However, to it, from your question, what really took place and the sort of the power that had already been negotiated within the 44 countries. So the powers were still restrained to the 44, despite more nations joining them. And within the quota system and the special drawing rights, you would find additional countries still getting a pie, but then not to a measure, and I will say to the extent of countries maybe like US, because for them, they do control nearly everything.
Yeah.
So all from 44, the institutions have grown to be global institutions controlling, determining, and giving a say towards what the rest of the world should think. However, in terms of giving an opinion and to it cementing the opinion, it's only dependent to the original 44 countries and to an extent, the ones that do have now those huge, I would say, huge voting rights because they do control and dominate the say that goes. So over time, the roles have been coming in bigger and bigger, but then the stake not ever shrinking to an extent, but then as well in terms of whatever they've been in time coming to address, sort of now like morphing. So let's begin from the quota system that was developed. To it does inform the representation, it does inform the special drawing rights, it does inform the voting rights. So what do I mean when I'm saying about all these elements? When representatives do meet, given the quota system having allocated a much bigger voting power to the original 44 institutions, then they to an extent have been able to retain that. And it doesn't come to maybe to an extent to just maybe one single top person at the head, but then it goes into how departments are able to work. What policy structure will they now focus on, depending on the different economic period that we are in. And to it, to an extent, it also pegs to something quite important, which is on the interest being paid. Remember, on some of these sort of loans that they're able to access. So some of this privilege is only to an extent still maintained by the original 44 countries to an extent, with some of these original 44 members as well, some of them having a higher stake with the likes of US, being able to control some of the conversations. So this has been happening, and to an extent over time we'll come to realize we're able to see it even at the moment. Quite shocking and also quite important. While they are developing all these things, they only have one bit in mind, the success bit of it. But then to them as well, we've seen countries like Greece falling through the cracks. We haven't seen sort of to an extent a backstop towards some of the elements on what they had suggested, and if they do have ramification impacts to them as well, and maybe as we will maybe delve into it to some of the countries that will later now join the FIUs. Yes.
Yeah, and 81 years later, how do the original goals of and the mandate for which the IFIs were formed, how does it differ between how they operate today compared to the original intention of when they were formed 81 years ago? And as you speak about that, there has been a school of thought that feels that IFI policies reinforce dependency among states, but they also limit national economic sovereignty, the ability of states to make their own decisions about their own economies. How has that morphed over the last 81 years, the mandate and structure of IFIs?
Quite important and also worth noting. Over time, as we had sort of like unpacked earlier, there will be different shifts either being caused by natural catastrophe, such as maybe elements of limited rainfall, giving about drought, wars. But then to it, quite important, when we were starting off our conversation, we had said that when they met at first, they had agreed to peg everything on the dollar. The dollar on the gold. Later, something else happens and introduces a new concept that they have to also, to an extent, think through. Whilst maintaining their initial mandate of looking into the forex bits of the different nation, and that was now the introduction of petrodollar. It comes to now change nearly everything, because now with respect to inflation, then it now depends to the profitability of oil that is now pegged to an extent the US dollar, introducing now the petrodollar economy. Remember, all the countries at the moment would import and use oil. To it also, other than that change, we had earliest on given an example of the likes of Greece. There have been the likes of Mexico, where some of the policies that IMF and the World Bank have been able to impose have also collapsed because of some of these sort of like new economic shifts that sort of to an extent they had not encompassed whilst they were morphing. So over time, the mandate of the international financial institutions has been growing bigger. To them, some of the policies that they have sort of suggested have been only looking towards the better side of things. However, to it, they have missed out on one important aspect of what if there is a new thing introduced to it, a new variable. What if there is failure to whatever they're sort of proposing. So within those two elements, you might find there are gaps. So to it, then it now gets you to the point where some of the sovereign countries have been able to now get stuck into now the element of being dependent. Remember now, to an extent, they now came with elements of now we want to do poverty reduction, but then with an element of advancing loans. To it, at the current state, it's not something to an extent foreseen when they are meeting 1944, begging on tax, but then we know to it debt is just a tax carried forward. Now to that concept, you will find countries now sinking to a vicious cycle of paying debt. That's one. To others, with respect to now responding to inflation, you will find some of the proposals that they're giving. To us, we call them regressive tax policies. You will find countries now being there, trying to close up on the fiscal deficit, but then to an extent, not being able to provide the basic needs to its citizens. Could be much going into extracting money that has been hard-earned, and households could not be able to spend on education, households could not be able to spend on healthcare, and to it, these are some of the ravaging impact and effects that we've been able to see. And to it cuts across some of these countries, not only sort of like the global south, but then also to the countries that they've been able to maybe work independently with on the global north, such as Greece. They still face some of these damaging impacts. However, given our local context as the global south, we face dire. And with other now things coming up, such as now the COVID and the whatnot, it then makes it quite difficult for us at the moment.
Yeah, as we are discussing, the ability of states to design their own economic trajectory, I know you would want to deepen that a little further, as we bring this to a close. Thinking about the impact that IFIs have had on the economies in the developing countries. What are your closing views as we bring this to a close?
Quite important to it in terms of now bringing it home. I think the conversation at the moment, it's not a new thing. The structural adjustments program that were introduced during the 90s and the 80s in Africa really did a collapse in some of the institutions. Not only in Africa, in some of the global South countries. And you'll see likes of countries maybe such as Vietnam, Singapore, and China forging their own way, their own course to be able to get their own sovereignty. As well, at the moment, when the conversations are ongoing, some of these proposals that the IFIs, the international financial institutions, have been able to maybe advocate or bring home. Some of them have realized some little bit of outcomes. So you'll find nations going from 8% to 10-15% in terms of tax to GDP ratio. Quite important, but as well, to it, the sovereignty of a country comes first. Currently, Kenya, we're close to 15 to 18% for a case example. However, as witnessed some 2 years back, these were supposed to be gotten to a base, a threshold of close to 22 to 25%, and it really had a bad boomerang to it, because at the moment, whilst we, to an extent, are open to work with them, we have to be very cautious to the different local context on how the economies are functioning. As well, also, the conditionalities that come to a country for you to be able to work with them to an extent at the moment, we really have to be very careful to what we are opening up for and what we are signing to. Quite important at the moment, some of the policies that would come as sweet, such as FDIs, open it up, give us this, we're able to give you this. We really have to be of a keen eye to try and see what are we gaining versus what are we losing. Quite important, as we will be able to see to an extent in some of the research that have been able to be published, much that is lost in terms of illicit financial flows to an extent, and some of what has been lost to some of these regressive tax expenditures, compared to some of now what comes into an extent as grants, really don't match up. So when we are opening our borders to go to work and collaborate with the global north to an extent, and also invite to be able to gain sort of maybe to an extent share and learn best practices with some of these international financial institutions, we have to really be careful and to just cement our solid ground and have sort of like an Afrocentric way or global South way to be able to look inwardly and importantly have it as a stand, so that when we are getting to sit at the table, we also have got our own advantage points that we've already mapped out.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Job, for reminding us that countries must come up with policies that look inward, that protect their most vulnerable, and help them to grow their economies in a way that is sustainable. Thank you, and we look forward to having you yet again. To our viewers, thank you for listening in to Regional Advocacy on regressive policies that foster inequality. This podcast series is powered by Tax Justice Network Africa. We welcome you to follow us. We welcome you to subscribe. We also welcome you to share. Stay tuned for more.